Welcome to this second session of our series, Risen, Ascended, and Glorified, Living a Life that is Eucharistic, Missional, and Hope-Filled. We're going to consider the question, where is he in this session? Just to remind ourselves of the really minimal biblical witness to the actual event of the ascension, we learn from Mark that he was taken up into heaven and sat down at the right hand of God. Luke tells us he was carried up into heaven, and in Acts, also written by Luke, we learn that he was lifted up and a cloud took him out of their sight. But even though the biblical evidence is brief, there's some really important key words and concepts. Let's take a look at some of the key words and concepts from these scriptural references to the ascension of Jesus. First of all, we're told that Jesus withdrew. The Greek word here implies a setting apart, creating an interval, and being carried, which is the experience that the disciples had at the Transfiguration. They were carried, if only for a moment, into the glory of God's space. This withdrawal that's happening means that a definite separation between Jesus and the disciples is happening. We're also told that Jesus was carried up, and in the scriptural language, that is a sign of exaltation. We are told that Jesus was carried up into a cloud, which is another biblical symbol for God's presence. So Jesus is going into the God space. This God space is called heaven. In Greek, the word is uranos, and that is the name of the Greek god of the sky or of the heavens, and hence the name of one of our planets. Heaven is the biblical abode of God. The word also means sky, and that really fits the Acts chapter 1 story of the apostles looking up into the sky. They were looking up toward the limits of their vision up in the sky, which for them would constitute the heavenly horizon. We are told that when Jesus entered the God space of heaven, he sat down. Now, who sits down? Kings, queens, gods, they sit down. And who stays standing? The slaves, those who are serving the king or the queen or the god. They stand so that they can do their work of serving. Jesus sits down to rule and to reign as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We are told that he sat down at the right hand of God. Now, as a left-handed person, I have a little bit of a problem with this. What's so special about the right hand? But this is what we have, so this is what we have to deal with. The right hand of God is a symbol of divine power. So it tells us that when Jesus sits at the right hand of God, it tells us Jesus is divine and that Jesus has power. Now, power is not to be held just to have it and not to do anything with it, but power is to be exercised. So even in his place of glory, sitting at the right hand of the Father, Jesus still has work to do. From the biblical accounts, now we turn to some theological discourse. Now, the brevity of the biblical account led John Macquarie to consider that the stories of the ascension are myth, that are grounded in an outdated cosmology, basically an ancient Near Eastern cosmology that has a three-story universe where the middle floor is the earth, and the bottom floor is hell, and the top floor is heaven. And that makes earth a temporary lodging and where one has as their final destination depends on how one behaves during the temporary lodging on earth. If you misbehave, you end up going to the bottom floor, and if you behave well, you go to the top floor. And that's the cosmology McCrory suggested is behind the stories of the ascension. N.T. Wright suggests something a bit different. N.T. Wright says that there is a biblical view of heaven and earth as two halves of God's created order. They are dimensions that overlap. Heaven is God's space and earth is human space. And what N.T. Wright says about the risen human body of Jesus is that it is the first object to be fully at home in either space. The first object to be fully at home in either space, but not the only object. The first, because there are more to come. Because what is anticipated, God's plan for this God space and human space is for the whole thing to be made new, and to be fully and forever united. So at his ascension, Jesus returns from his time in the human space back to God space. And this is not merely a mythical story, but also it's not literal in our three-dimensional way of thinking. It is beyond our 3D reality. I would suggest that it is realer than real. Meanwhile, in Baton Rouge, Garrett Dawson would add these thoughts. At the Ascension, Jesus went to the place where God meets his creatures. And he was kind of leaning on Karl Barth, one of the great theologians of the 20th century, for this. Barth taught that heaven is the dwelling place of God within creation. You see, Barth said that heaven is part of God's creation. It's not a separate order of reality. And I think that's really important, because keeping heaven as part of God's creation and not separate safeguards us from Gnostic dualism, which sees salvation as an escape from earth to heaven, or escape of the soul from the body. What is Gnosticism? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's talk about that. Gnosticism has been around the church almost since the beginning. It continues today, even though it's long been declared a heresy. But you can declare a teaching a heresy, but you cannot stop people from believing it. So it still is around today. The Gnostics were people who said that they had gnosis, which is the Greek word for knowledge. So to be agnostic is to be without knowledge on a certain topic. The knowledge that the Gnostics said they had is a secret knowledge that was given to them by God. And it was for them to share as they saw fit. So it was reserved for the adherents of the Gnostic sect, generally those adherents being paying customers. I think that's a big part of the deal. Gnosticism is based in the philosophy of Plato, so it's Platonic, which sees a great divide between matter and spirit, between body and soul. In Platonism, matter is generally evil, while spirit is more likely to be good. The body, as matter then, is corrupt, and the soul, which is spiritual, is really all God is interested in saving. Salvation, for the Gnostics, is the escape of the soul from its bodily imprisonment. One of the side effects of Gnosticism is antinomianism, which is a way of saying that since your body doesn't really figure in God's plan of salvation, you can do whatever you want to it, with it, or in it. Morals don't count because God is only interested in your soul. So let your body eat, drink, and be merry. It's just all fine and good. So is Gnosticism consistent with Scripture? No. Genesis 1:31. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. It was very good. And that word in Hebrew is a quality that does not change. It is good, and it shall be good. Even though what God has made has been marred by human sin and been made subject to futility, as Paul says in Romans chapter 8, yet it is destined for redemption because God made it, and God made it good. Physical matter is good, and that is where the Gnostic heresy falls short of being a true reflection of a biblical worldview. True confession time. I have my own inclinations towards Gnosticism, this idea of escape from the present, which is not so good, and to find some new reality that's going to be utopian. I've had this condition probably since I was a little kid. As long as I can remember, I've had a sense of wanderlust. Sometimes I feel like I just need a change of scenery. And when a day in ministry doesn't go so well, and maybe I start to think maybe I need a change of parish, thinking that the grass must be greener over in that other parish that seems to be going so well. And when I feel like where I am is just not so ideal, even if I can't go somewhere physically, I think, gosh, I wish I could go to my happy place. And one of my happy places is in this picture. This is a picture of a group when I was in Boy Scouts hiking in the San Gorgonio Wilderness area, and we had been up on the top of that snow-covered San Gorgonio Peak, and I've hiked that wilderness many times. It was right out the back door of our scout camp. I've taken troops back into that back country. I know it, or at least I used to know it, like the back of my hand. It's just one of the most sacred places in my life, and sometimes I just want to go there and be in the midst of those trees and on that big, tall, often snow-covered peak. The only problem with longing for utopia is that sometimes, actually most of the time, utopia isn't as great as it seemed to be. You see, this picture is my happy place now, after being ravaged by a forest fire. It's going to be years and years and years before my happy place looks like the way it did when I remember it from my good old scouting days. Every age has its Gnostics. Way back in the 2nd and 3rd century, Tertullian had to deal with them. And so do we, often in ourselves. We'll talk more about what Tertullian had to say when we get to the question of, is Jesus real? So where is Jesus after his ascension? The short answer is Jesus is in heaven. As we can see in this picture from the shrine of Our Lady of Walsingham in England, those are the feet of Jesus, still bearing the marks of the wounds from the cross as he disappears into the cloud. But heaven is not the final destination. Heaven is the God space, which is separate from the human space now, and they sometimes overlap. But these two halves of God's creation are destined to be reunited. And in the 21st and 22nd chapters of Revelation, we see what's coming. New. A new heaven, a new earth, a new Jerusalem, so beautiful, like a bride on her wedding day. The newness is so amazing that N.T. Wright says newness itself will be renewed. In this new creation, Revelation says there will be no more sea, which for the people of Israel, the sea was a symbol of chaos and danger and disorder. There will be no more separation between God and humankind. God will make a home with us. We will be at home with God. We will be at home with God in a renewed, reunited creation, which will be purged of all the old order tragedies, about which the Lord says they are done. In this new creation, the curse of Genesis 3 is undone. There will be no more toil and sweat, no more briars and thorns, no more enmity, no more returning to dust. But it's not endless lounging. Sorry, Rover. Endless harp playing. Or endless boredom. It will be the worship work of a priestly people. Garden work of tending God's new creation. Where is Jesus? In heaven, the God space that overlaps with the human space. And one day, in God's good time, it will be rejoined with the human space, finally and forever and fully, in new beauty and life, a new creation, a new Jerusalem. And what does all this mean for us as we live a Eucharistic, missional, and hope-filled life? Let's think first about the hope-filled aspect. I think about what the Catechism in the Book of Common Prayer teaches us about our Christian hope. And it says that our Christian hope is to live with confidence in newness and fullness of life. And that new and full life, it doesn't start after we die. It starts at baptism. Baptism is the beginning of a lifelong following of Jesus, who leads the way. Following Jesus, we find strength and encouragement. We encounter those overlap moments when the God space and the human space come together. We anticipate being raised in the fullness of our being, body and soul, and we look forward to a new existence in union with God, in perfect union with God. Imagine that. And in union with all of God's people. Because Jesus has ascended to heaven, to the God space, and because he is seated at God's right hand and continues to rule and guide the church, our life can be Eucharistic. We can, when we come to the church for the celebration of the Holy Eucharist, enter into that event as an event of God's kingdom. It's not an event about God's kingdom. It is an event of God's kingdom. To use a sports analogy, it's the difference between sitting in the stands and being out on the field. When we come to the Eucharist, we are in the field of what's happening in God's kingdom, because that is a kingdom event. In the Eucharist, then we are, as Jesus was at the Ascension, lifted up, carried up, taken up to God's presence. Think about the architecture of the church, how the key elements happen on raised space. There's a practical reason for that. It makes them easier to see and hear, but there's a symbolic significance to it as well. These things that happened on a higher plane tell us that the kingdom is very near. The God space and the human space are overlapping. Jesus ascended into this real space of heaven can also have an impact on our life in mission. N.T. Wright proposes a three-pronged mission strategy for most Christian congregations. And he says the 3 points, the 3 prongs of this strategy are justice, taking part in God's bringing all things to right; beauty, through art, music, architecture, and other means pointing to the beauty of the new creation; and evangelism, extending God's invitation to every person. And so for our missional life, it means pursuing justice, because heaven is real and a new creation is coming. And every person is within the scope of God's care. Every person is invited to follow where Jesus has led the way. Human need matters to God. And so we engage in ministries that address human need and thus advance the kingdom. And so ministries of justice, just like worship, are events of the kingdom. We engage in ministries that promote beauty, because heaven is real and a new creation is coming. The arts are signposts that point the way. The arts spur our longing for the kingdom that is coming. And when we pass on the gift of artistic expression, that continues to instill that hope and that faith in the new creation that is coming. And evangelism, as we share the good news, because heaven is real and a new creation is coming. We have good news to share. We can tell people your life matters. You matter in your body and your soul. You matter. Your whole being is of value to God, and God invites you to share in full and abundant life. Jesus is in this real space called heaven, the place where God meets his creatures. It's not myth. It's not just a spiritual plane. It's reality. In fact, we could say it is hyper reality. This hyper reality, this new creation, it's so amazing. Even C.S. Lewis couldn't fully describe it. He tried in his wonderful book called The Great Divorce, which is not about the breakup of a marriage. It's a bus tour of heaven and hell. And C.S. Lewis's protagonist, as the bus takes them into this shining country that he realizes heaven, is trying to describe what he's seeing and feeling. It's light and coolness, like an early summer morning just before sunrise. And then comes the realization of being in a larger sort of space than he had known during his moribund existence. And this larger sort of space is not necessarily free of danger, which reminds me of Aslan the lion, who he's good, but he's not safe. And then C.S. Lewis's protagonist comes to the frustrating conclusion of being unable to convey the real quality of all he saw and heard. Our parting thought comes from Baton Rouge, where Garrett asks, "Why is this so difficult to convey?" And he answers in this way: it's because of our fallen humanity, which is being redeemed. So fear not. God is good, and God is merciful, and God is grace. And we need that grace of God's communicating with us through divine revelation. And that happens through symbolic language, because in our reality, mere words can't do justice to this hyper reality that is of a different, more enduring sort than the reality in which we now live. But even though it is different, it is a reality to which Jesus is leading us, because he is the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, and he is leading the way. If you've made it this far, thank you for sticking with it, and I hope that there's been something for you in this presentation, and I hope that you'll take a few minutes to answer just a few questions in this questionnaire. The link is there. It's also a separate email if you can't get this link to open. But thank you again for being part of this series, and I hope that it really is helping you to lead a life that is more Eucharistic and missional and hope-filled.